Welcome to Module 3 of KIN 2700. This is Stress and Your Spiral of Becoming. It is based on the work from Unstressed by Dr. Elaine Doherty, a book about improving emotional health, wellness, and resilience through the understanding and the transformation through the body. It is written by Dr. Elaine Doherty, a writer, speaker, professor, co-director of the Mind and Heart Lab, author of 3 books of emotional health and wellness, and a blog writer for Psychology Today. This is part 1, Understanding and Reducing Your Fear Response. Hi everyone, welcome to Module 3. In Module 3 and 4, we really start to delve into what your fear response is and how it really controls your perception of stress. It's broken down into 2 parts, so we will just watch part 1 this week. This is part 1. Part 1 lays the foundation for understanding what happens to us when we get off balance, when we get consumed with stress, anxiety, worry, depression, loneliness, and it really kind of lays the foundation of understanding what happens when our fear response system takes over and we get out of balance and we don't know how to function from a grounded space. So the very first thing, again, this is about improving your emotional health. So the very first thing that we should be talking about is, what is emotional health? The best way that I can describe it is that you know it when you feel it. You know when you're performing your best, when you're at your deepest self, and when you're just kind of in the zone and just grounded in who you were meant to be, seeing and perceiving the world from that space and behaving from that space. You also know when you're completely knocked off with worry and anxiety and perceiving the whole world from that space and beginning to, behave, make choices, react from that space. We know it when we feel it. It is an all-consuming physiological mind-body response. And so to be able to really understand how to reduce one and cultivate the other, we need to really kind of look inside and see what's going, because our beliefs about stress and anxiety are backwards. We always think of stress as something out there that's happening to us and we're just responding. And the truth is that who we are on the inside and the way we're processing on the inside is how we perceive and how we make sense of what's going on the outside. And so the only way to balance our system and to be able to cultivate more often behaving from that grounded space is to look inside to find out what's going on, and then to use that as a blueprint to be able to use that as a transformation for change. The truth is that we have 2 systems that guide us. And you'll see shortly that you have your fear response system and you have your calm and connection system. Those are 2 drives that drive our emotional lives. And you can't be in both drives at once. And the drive that you're in most often is the drive that becomes the dominating force of your life. Because again, as you'll see shortly, the more often we're in any drive, the more we create the capacity to actually live from that drive. And I'm going to lay all this out, exactly how this all works for you, because the truth is that we don't see the world how it is. We see the world how we are. And basically, we have 2 ways of seeing the world. We have a way of seeing the world from that stressed out, anxious, worried space, or depressed or lonely or any one of the other kind of emotional states that goes along with those. And as you'll also see shortly, those are all part of stress. But we also have the way of functioning from that space of our deepest self and our grounded self. So the big question is, how do we reduce the times that we're overcome with the emotional states that knock us off balance? And how do we more often soak in, rest in those states when we're our best self? And how do we actually create the capacity to more often live from that state? And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like to share a story with you, because this story for me kind of takes all of these pieces together and and is a really good representation of what this whole program is about. And it was a morning, this was a morning many years ago when I was a single parent, and I had two very young boys, and those boys were very active, and I was working full time, and I also was trying to put myself through a PhD program. To say the least, it was a very chaotic time in our life, and we were doing everything we could. I mean, we were doing great if we could just get ourselves where we had to go in the morning, because to get my sons off to school and their homework done and them ready for their day, and me to my work and ready to do my day, was just an absolute challenge every morning. And if you have ever been a parent of young children, you know what that's like. Well, it happened to be a really, really, really chaotic morning one morning, and I'm trying to get the kids to school. And of course, what happens is when you get stressed out, you get knocked off balance, and then you see and perceive everything from that state. So what did I see and perceive? I started seeing and perceiving, my inner chatter goes off. I'm seeing and perceiving everything from that state. I'm just beating myself up. I'm a horrible parent. If I was a better parent, my kids would be perfectly on time and perfectly dressed and have their homework done, and we would all be calm and happy, and all the stories that start to go off. We have between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day, and those thoughts were beginning to just consume me. Those 60 and 80,000 thoughts. They're about 80 to 90% repetitive and about 80 to 90% negative. And those were going full force with me. And so I'm trying. I finally get the kids off to school. And okay, I'm doing good. I know if I can just make it to school on time, I'll be fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm driving down the road and there's construction. Oh my gosh, this is just going to make me late. And now all of a sudden my inner chatter kicks in about what a horrible professor I am, and how bad I would just, if I could just get it all together, I'd be a better professor, and I'd be there on time, and I'd be all organized. And so I'm just in my head getting more worried and more worried and more worried. And the truth is I was just beginning to learn all this stuff, but it hadn't really kicked in for me that morning. And so I'm driving, I'm thinking, okay, if I can just get there. And I used to have, it's not true at Cal Poly now, but I used to have a parking lot right next to the building that I taught in, and I could always find a parking place at Cal Poly. Now, if you're from Cal Poly, you know that that is zero true now, but it used to be true. And so that was one thing I didn't have to worry about, and I could be parked and in the building within 5 minutes because I just parked right next to the building. So I pull in and I'm trying to get there and I run into more construction, and it's raining, and I'm just, of course, now my inner chatter is going 100 miles an hour and telling me what a horrible person I am, and every single shame-based thought that I've always harbored about myself is coming up. And I pull in and there's no parking space. I couldn't believe it. So I gotta go drive back all the way around the building, all the way around to a whole nother parking lot on the other side. And it's now my inner chatter is just running rampant like crazy. And something happened, and I don't know what it is, but it finally kicked in. It was almost like something knocked me overhead. I heard a voice. It was like, Elaine, what are you doing? And again, I was just beginning to learn this stuff, so it did take a little while to kick in. But as soon as it kicked in, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Just pause. So I got out of my car and I just took a breath and I just paused. And it's like, okay, what's really going on right here, right now? Just pause. And then after I paused, I thought, okay, just become present. Because again, these are all the tools that I'm learning at the time. So just become present. What does it feel to be present right here, right now? It's actually kind of nice. It's the first time that I actually noticed the beauty of the morning. Yeah, it was raining, but it wasn't raining that bad. It was just sprinkling a little bit. And the truth is that the light sprinkles kind of felt nice on my cheeks, and it was beautiful. And I looked around, and there was Mount Baldy off in the distance, and there was snow on it, and the athletic fields were beautiful, and and it was just like, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden, in that moment, everything shifted. what's true right now? What's true? I love my children. Sometimes we have some trouble in the morning, but I am so grateful to even have those children. And in that moment, everything shifted, but nothing changed. Everything externally was the same, but internally, everything shifted. And all it took was a pause and really becoming present. And I need to be really clear that I did that first, because what was going to happen next became really important, but I had no idea something was going to happen next. And had it not happened in the order that it did, I would have never been available for what happened next. And so what happened is I'm walking in, I go across the athletic fields, and I run into my dad. Now, my dad and I taught for the same department, but I was always running in late to the other side, so I rarely saw him actually, even though we taught for the same department. And my father, my father was my hero in my life. And when I saw him, because I had shifted beforehand, it just seemed like he was the most important thing at that moment. It didn't matter that I was late, and honestly, I really wasn't that late. It was something that I was making up in my head. It was only an exercise class. It's not like the whole world is going to fall apart if I'm a few minutes late for an exercise class. And my dad was just the most important thing to me at that moment. And I felt like a little girl just in love with my daddy, the hero. And he was teaching a golf class in the rain. And, he used to carry these huge umbrellas. And so I just dropped all my stuff and I held the umbrella for him. And, his class is standing in the rain. And I don't know how to explain it, but there's those moments when magic happens, and the magic of connection is so far beyond words you can't even explain it. But that was one of those moments with me and my father. And then it just started raining harder, and so he was laughing, his golf class was laughing, and he excused them because it was time for them to go. My class was inside, so I left him, and I went into the building, and I was walking down the hallway. I thought, wow, that's what that was all about. What a lesson. Because I was maybe a few more minutes late, but when I walked into my class, I was fully available. I was emotionally grounded. I was fully available. I was really able to connect with my students. It was like I was bringing in what I was in myself, I was bringing in a completely different person than if I would have kept in that stressed out state and ran into my class, maybe even a few minutes early, but stressed out, not available, blowing my stress all over my class. It was a complete transformation of who I was bringing into the class. And had the story ended there, it would have been enough, but it didn't. My dad started not feeling well, and when he excused his class, he went home for the day because he wasn't feeling well. And when he got home, he had a massive heart attack and died. And that was the last time that I ever saw him. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. And I thank God for that missing parking place and for being late that morning. But it's so important. I can't imagine how different the story would have been if my last words to my dad would have been, "I'm sorry, Dad, I'm stressed out. It's been a horrible morning with the kids. I don't have the time. I'll just talk to you later." I can't imagine how different that story would be. And it's so important to me when I bring back that it wasn't seeing him that transformed me. It was that moment of choice in myself. And that moment of choice in myself made me available to be with him in a way that I would have never been able to be if I hadn't have taken that moment of shift. So let's bring this all back to what our whole program is about. For me, that morning epitomizes kind of the power and the potential of both systems. I was overcome in the morning with stress and anxiety and worry and shame and beating myself up. And yet every moment offered me a shift. It took me a while, But once I was really able to shift, then there was just the power and the potential of a whole different way, a whole different emotional way of being. And so again, this is all couched in stress. I need to really be clear about what stress is. Stress is, or anxiety or worry or depression or loneliness, all of that is under the umbrella of stress. Because when we really look at what stress in itself is emotional disequilibrium. What does that mean? When the term stress was originally coined, it was coined from mechanics, and all it was meant was it was kind of the force against the free flowing of a machine. And so we know when we're free flowing, we know when our bodies and our minds and our hearts and our souls are in sync, and we know when we're working well together. And we also know when we're not. So stress is anything that counteracts that state of us being kind of flourishing in our full sense of being. And so again, stress is a real umbrella term that that includes all of that. So what might you be feeling right now? You might be feeling worry, you might be feeling anxiety, you might be feeling, the fear of the unknown, not knowing what all of this means. You might also just have kind of a non-specific anxiety and worry dominating your existence. But the thing is that there is hope. When we couch emotional difficulty in the terms of looking at what it is, emotional disequilibrium, and we ground it in kind of how our whole mind-body complex works together, we can see how it all happens. We can see how our brain and our perception kind of starts that whole kind of domino effect of us falling out of that state of equilibrium. And then we can see how to be able to reduce our fear response, basically when that stress system is running rampant. But we can also see then the power and the potential of intentionally cultivating the other. And so, even though couching stress as anything that causes emotional disequilibrium, or worry, loneliness, depression, worry and anxiety about the unknown, worry, all of the myriad of things that we might be feeling right now, we can understand why and how we experience emotional upheaval in the first place. But from that understanding, we can create a blueprint for change, and that's the most important piece here. So again, while we're kind of globalizing stress, that in a way might sound a little discouraging at first, it's really actually hopeful, because then it gives us a blueprint for change. It gives us kind of a way to be able to understand and therefore intentionally cultivate a different way of being. So what is this about the human system you live in? Let's talk about this a minute. I talk a lot about the term body, and when I talk about body, I don't just mean from your shoulders to your toes. What I mean is this whole system, the human system that you live in. And the truth is that this whole human system that you live in, as long as you're humanly alive, and I'm not talking about what happens after you're not alive in your human body anymore, but as long as you're humanly alive, your human body, this whole mind-body complex system that you live in, facilitates your experience for you. It thinks, it feels, it tells you how to behave. And again, I'm not saying it comes from there, but it facilitates your experience. Okay, so it facilitates your experience. So understanding in that human sense how it works is an all-important piece here. The next really important piece to understand is that you are a system of adaptation, meaning that anytime you experience any emotional state, any mental state, any psychological state, you just get better at that state. And I'm going to get a little bit deeper into how and why that happens in a little bit. So let's go back to our two drives. Again, you have two primary drives that control your existence. One is your fear response system. One is your calm and connection system. You may have heard about your fear response system. It's the fight or flight complex. We've always, a lot of us have heard that a lot when we we talk about stress. But the second system often gets left out of the conversation. And really true management of emotional health needs to look at both, because we need to reduce one, yes, but we need to also actively cultivate the other. Because when you look at our bodies as a system of adaptation, we're just going to get better at what we do. And so all we do is reduce our fear response, we're just going to get better at reducing our fear response. But after reducing our fear response, if we intentionally cultivate love, compassion, hope, gratitude, then those begin to be the systems that actually control our lives. So it's a two-piece approach. And the thing is that we had to have both of these drives to survive as a species. We had to have our fear response. We had to have an immediate, totally reactive, all bodily consuming reaction to fear, to stress, to danger. And it had to be pre-thought. It had to consume our whole system, and we had to react. We still have the remnants of that system in our body. The problem is what causes our fear response now is every time we open an email, or every time we have a conversation, or it gets activated way, 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 way more than it did in the times of history when we were really relying on that drive to survive. But the truth is, we also had to have the other drive. We had to have a drive to love. We had to have a drive to bond. We had to have a drive to connect. We had to have a drive to create social connection. Because if we didn't have that drive, we also would have survived. We would have never survived as a species. We would have never loved each other. We would have never created community. So we had to have both drives. The thing is that you can't be in both drives at once. Physiologically, one or the other drive is prominent in your body. You can't be in both at once. You can switch from one to the other, but you can't really be grounded in both at once. The second piece is that the one that you're in most often is the one that flourishes. It's the one that creates the capacity for more of the same. And we're going to talk about our whole physiological imprint. We have a physiological imprint of every moment of every day. And the more you have any physiological imprint, you just get better at that imprint. It's like exercise. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Or learning to ride a bike, or learning a math problem. The more that your system gets used to doing that thing, the better that you get at it. It's the same thing with our emotional systems. So whatever emotional system, whatever drive we're in most often, we actually create a greater capacity to live from that drive. So it's not just what we're experiencing in the moment, but it's also what we're creating as a capacity to have the primary operating system of our life. The other piece is that emotion is a primary expression of each drive, right? So emotion basically is really what's the dominant drives of our lives. And it's not, the question isn't, is emotion good or bad? It's what emotions lead to kind of a healthy, grounded way of being, and what emotions lead to more of a chaotic place of being. Because as chaotic and unstable as unstable emotion can be, grounded, loving, and compassionate emotion may be your greatest asset. And it's the quality and the context of the emotion that determines which drive dominates. We used to have this conversation, is emotion good or emotion bad? That's not what the question should be. The question should be, which emotions lead to life and which emotions don't. And again, I don't use the words positive and negative because there's an inherent judgment then in emotions that we might term as negative, and I don't believe that. I think an out of balance emotion is an emotion that's just looking for healing. So I don't use the words positive and negative, but to remain in certain clusters of emotion too long can be really life degenerating. Also, to intentionally cultivate other emotional states, love, compassion, hope, connection, then that leads to states of life generation. The other piece here is that we see the world through how we feel. So at any given point in time, your whole mind-body complex is resting in and then reflecting an emotional state. But from that emotional state, we see and perceive what what the outside world means. So we see the world through how we feel at any given point in time. So I want you to think back on the short recording we saw in the module last week, where there were two soundtracks. First, a very discordant soundtrack, and then second, some very beautiful music. And you actually saw visually the same soundtrack, but maybe picked up a lot of different things that you were seeing just by the felt state of what the soundtrack was designed to give you. Just think back on that for a moment. I don't know how many times I've seen that recording, but every time through, the first time I feel more anxious, the first time I see just more strife, I see more struggle, and the second time through, it always seems slower, it seems more relaxed. I'm always picking up a smile I didn't pick up before. I'm seeing beauty in ways that I didn't the first time through. And again, I've seen that a million times. But so the big thing here is that we absolutely see the world through how we feel. So it's really important to kind of think about the feeling states that we're bringing to every moment of every day. But then the second piece here that's really, really important, as you'll see in just a few minutes, not only do we see the world through how we feel, but then how we feel begins to dictate how we see this world. And so it's this endless feedback loop or endless spiral, what I call the spiral of becoming, that creates our reality every day. And then again, the more it creates our reality every day, the more we just create the capacities to live from those states. So we're going to get deeper into talking about these two systems and kind of how they play out in our body. Okay, so let's bring this into context of everything that we've talked about. Number one, we all have two primary drives that dominate our existence: our fear response system, our common connection system. We can't be in both at once. We're in one or the other, and we see, perceive, behave from that state. The second piece of this, again, is that we are a system of adaptation. So whichever state we're in most often is the state that we create the capacity to be in more of the same. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some psychophysiological foundations pretty briefly. We don't have time to go into it super deep, and at the same time, it's really important to kind of get some kind of understanding of the foundations of this. What we're going to talk about is a couple of things. So we have these two drives. Well, how do we get programmed for those two drives? So we get programmed initially to see and perceive in certain ways, but then when we see and behave in certain ways, and we keep perpetuating the way we see and behave and react, then we just keep perpetuating that programming. So how does that all happen? So this is what I call the spiral of becoming. Every moment of every day we are transforming. Every moment of every day we carry a physiological imprint of that moment. What we're thinking about, what we're feeling, our perceptions, all of that plays out in our whole mind-body complex. Now again, because we're a system of adaptation, the more anything plays out in our mind-body complex, the better we get at doing that. Again, it's just like exercise, or just like learning a math problem. Your body experiences something, and then it just gets more efficient at experiencing that thing. Our emotional systems are no different. So every moment of every day we're becoming something, and this is what I call the spiral of becoming. And what it does is it just kind of really simply lays out how kind of this happens in our whole mind-body complex. Now, again, we have a ton of spirals going on at any given point in time. This is kind of the way I try to simplify it. It all starts with our perception. We are perceiving way beyond our awareness every moment of every day through our eyes, through our ears, through all of our senses. Most of it is subconscious, meaning that it's being processed by our brain, and beyond our knowledge. It may come to knowledge if parts of our brain decide that it's important enough to kind of bring to our attention. But we are perceiving all kinds of things that are going on in our environment at any given time. From that perception, again, this goes on in like a split second. From that perception, we make meaning, immediate meaning of what that means. And again, a lot of this is subconscious. It just is going on beyond our awareness. And then the minute we make any meaning of something, we have a physiological imprint that goes along with that meaning. It's, you know, our neural nets change, the electricity of our body changes, our biochemicals changes, but then the all-important arrow then is how we feel, again, goes back and affects how we're perceiving. And this, you just experienced all of this in the writing that you did and the little video clip that you saw. And then those BRCs that are spiraling off there are our behaviors, reactions, and choices that at any given moment in time, we are in any given point in the spiral, we will behave or react or make a choice that's consistent with kind of how that spiral is going for us. So how does it all start? The perception and the role of implicit memory. Why do we perceive the way we do? Well, we have this thing deep in our brain called our amygdala. And again, I'm really simplifying it because a lot of these systems play together. But I want to give you enough information for our purposes without overwhelming you with too much. So we have this thing in our brain called our amygdala. It's the size and shape of an almond, pretty small, but its job is enormous, and it records every experience we've ever had in our life, and it records it in emotional context, and it files it away to be used as programming to make meaning of all future events. It is subconscious. The amygdala itself is subconscious, although it works in concert with some more conscious parts of our brain, but the amygdala itself is subconscious. It's very connected. If you'll see that brown piece going down there as your brain stem, it is very connected to the rest of your body. So at some level, it's usually felt physiologically, but what it does is it records all of our past experience in emotional context, and then it evaluates our current situation and tells us how to feel in response to the way it's been programmed. So what then happens when your amygdala perceives something that looks something like it's experienced in the past? Front part of your brain is your frontal cortex, and that wants to make sense of it. And so what happens is your amygdala gets, kind of floods you with an emotional experience that's consistent with something that you've experienced before, and then the front part of your brain wants to make sense of it, so it attaches that feeling response to what's going on in your current environment. And this is going on all different levels, every moment of every day. It's how we make emotional meaning of our current context. If we didn't have that process in place, we wouldn't know how to make meaning of the things that we're seeing in our current environment. It's a really good process. And a lot of times it gets way out of balance because the amygdala does its job well, and sometimes it overdoes its job in the context of our current life. Again, the amygdala's job, built deep into our brain, is an important process. It teaches us to be pre-reactive, pre-thought when our brain senses danger. Imagine if I were a caveman and a tiger ate my friend yesterday and a lion comes walking up. I need to be programmed to associate big cat danger, and it had to be pre-thought, or I would have been dead. If I just sat there and thought, oh, wait a minute, this isn't orange and it doesn't have black stripes, I would have been dead by then. So the process is a good process. The problem is the way it colors our current perception. It's not always the threat that's programmed into our brain. It's like a fire alarm going off. And most of the time we react as if it's a full-fledged fire without even looking to see. So its job is to alarm us. Our job is to calm our systems down then and try to discern from the current moment to see what's going on. But most often we don't react like that. Most often our amygdala is coloring everything that we perceive in our existence, and we're operating from that coloring without even realizing that that's the case. It's also really important to remember that it's coloring everything that we perceive in very subtle ways that we may not even realize. So let me give you an example. I'm working with a man right now who is just excruciatingly worried about his mother's health. Now, given the fact that she's older and given the fact of everything that's going on in our society right now, that's a valid thing to be worried about. But he's so overwhelmed by the anxiety and the worry, and she's not exhibiting any symptoms, but he is so overwhelmed and so knocked off emotional balance that he can't do what he needs to do to be able to ground from a grounded state, be able to discern what's appropriate for her. So when we explored a little further about his struggles with this, what came up was that when he was younger, his stepfather had quite a drinking problem and was sometimes violent, and so the man that I was working with was always worried about his safety, always worried about his mother's safety, and always carrying this kind of non-specific anxiety about fearing the unexpected. So now, with not even realizing it, he's carrying those non-specific fears around his mother's health and safety into the situation right now, so much so that he can't operate from a grounded state in knowing really what's best for her. So your amygdala is constantly coding experience in the neurons of your brain and using that as programming to make emotional meaning of current circumstance. Sometimes that current meaning is way off balance, and sometimes that current meaning knocks us off our emotional equilibrium. So, and the way it records information, this is what a neuron in your brain looks like. It's a nerve cell. And the way that nerve cells connect together is the little pieces on the end there will connect to another neuron. One neuron itself doesn't really do anything, but the neurons connect to other neurons and they transfer information. And so all the experiences of our life get encoded in these neurons. Now, so the truth is that the experiences are over. And so a lot of people, unfortunately, we say, okay, the experience is over, so get over it. But the truth is that it's wired in our brain. And so if we don't wire something else in our brain in replace, then we're carrying it around all the time. And so every experience that we've ever had gets wired through these neural networks in our brain, and it's used as the programming to make sense of anything that we then experience in our current environment. So your wiring becomes your programming. It affects all that you perceive. It just does. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It doesn't make it good or bad. And my problem when I say this is then a lot of people start beating themselves up for their own programming, and that's not the point. The point is that when you just understand this, then it gives you a blueprint for change, because the beautiful thing that we have discovered in our neuroscience is that you have something called neuroplasticity. That means that the wiring isn't permanent. It means when you wire a new experience, it can actually break off and change the old experience. And so even those of you or those of us that have experienced trauma, either little trauma, big trauma, it's not in the event anymore. The event is over. And again, I don't mean to sound crass about it, because where it is wired in your neural nets. And the only way to really seriously get over it is to wire something else. Okay, suppressing doesn't work because it's still there. Taking off with it doesn't work because then you're just rewiring that experience. Blaming, shaming, or judging yourself doesn't work because then you're wiring in blame, shame, and judgment on top of the trauma. The only way to get over whatever has been traumatic to you in your past is to wire a different experience. So let's go back to the spiral of becoming. So that's how your perceptions get wired in your brain. So again, it's this wiring. The events of our lives are over, but we carry around this wiring that is used as our programming to make sense of everything that's going on in our environment, everything even way beyond conscious awareness. So then that first arrow going down from perception goes into making meaning. And again, most of this is subconscious. I wrote down their thoughts and emotions, but you can have thoughts and emotions that are subconscious. You just don't know they're going on. And so what happens is, and a lot of times you know this because you feel it. Again, you feel a response, and that's when your body, your whole mind-body complex is making sense of it, whether you're consciously aware that it's making sense of it or not. And then the meaning immediately lends itself to a physiological response. So now the second piece, remember I said how we get programmed initially is how our amygdala kind of programs us to perceive. But then what happens is the minute we make meaning of anything, then we respond. And when we respond with usually some kind of meaning. We respond with a behavior, or a reaction or a choice, but we also have a physiological response. So when we behave the same way we always have behaved, and we react the same way we always have reacted, what we do is then we just perpetuate that wiring, right? You hear a lot the saying, nerve cells that fire together wire together. But the other truth is that when they stop firing together, they stop wiring together. So anytime that we can stop our typical reaction, we can stop our typical behavior. And again, it's not suppressing it. It's not pretending it doesn't exist. It's authentically changing your experience, which is a whole different ballgame. And we're going to talk about how you do that. Then we begin to honestly change our experience. Okay, and so this is the only way to kind of break the spiral of becoming, is to jump in somewhere at that spiral and give yourself a different experience. Because as systems of adaptation, we always respond to our experience. We always get programmed by our experience. And so the only way to change our programming is to authentically change our experience. So when our physiology jumps in, we have neural patterns that react. If we react the way we've always reacted, our neural patterns are just wiring the way they've always wired. We have electrical patterns of our heart, and those electrical patterns of our heart actually reflect our emotional state. And at some level, every cell and organ feels it. The biochemicals in your body, again, reflect your emotional state. Biochemicals are exactly what they sound like. It's like you have a little IV of different biochemicals, and every time you experience anything emotionally, you're squishing that IV bag that's appropriate for that biochemical. Your biochemicals have receptor sites for every cell and organ in your body and your brain. So when you feel something and you have the biochemical reaction that goes along with a certain emotional state, it really is affecting every cell and every organ in your body. So that's that physiological imprint of every moment. And so again, if we react, behave, and make choices in the way that we always have been, if we keep seeing our external circumstances the way we always have, we keep perpetuating that physiological imprint, which then again goes back and changes our perception. You are transforming every moment of every day. The problem is a lot of times, most of the time, we're just transforming to more of the same because we're reacting and behaving and making choices. We're never changing our authentic experience. And then what do? We complain, why doesn't anything ever change for me? But yet we don't ever do the work to change what's going on inside of us. So then what happens is once we have that spiral, again, it's going on every moment of every day, it carries a whole embodied reaction. And when it carries a whole embodied reaction, again, we go back and perceive our environment and react to our environment as if that's the truth. So we're going to go deeper into the physiological aspects of the spiral of becoming next week, but I just wanted you to get a sense that every moment of every day you're transforming, and every moment of every day that's based on the perception that you have been programmed to be able to have. So I know I've given you a lot of information here, but the take-home message is that each of us are uniquely programmed to sense threat. Our deep brain is constantly scanning our environment for anything that it has been programmed to perceive as threatening to us. the way it gets our attention is to completely knock us off emotional balance and have us have a whole embodied experience of stress. This is what we call the stress response. So what happens when we have the stress response? We all have our own particular triggers. So it's really important to do a couple things here. It's important to understand what stress is for you in your own life. And again, a global term looking at stress is anything that throws you off emotional equilibrium. And again, stress isn't right or wrong. It's just important to understand. So, it's really helpful to kind of look at what is stress for you? How does it manifest? How does it feel? How do you usually react? We spent some time last week for you to just kind of reflect, what is stress for you? How do you experience stress personally? What are your personal triggers? We all get triggered by emotional issues that we're wired to do that. Again, the best way to work with them is to figure out when you are triggered and then be able to reground yourself and come out a different way. But the very first thing is looking at the things that we do get triggered by. And then what happens is we get triggered, the inner chatter starts immediately. We all have these inner reels of chatter, again, 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, primarily negative, primarily repetitive, and they just go off with a vengeance. And so what does your inner chatter tell you? What is it saying to you all day long? Because most of the time it's talking to us all day long, and we're so used to it, we don't even realize it. And again, we are molding to every experience. So if we're just living in this stressed out state, we're living constantly triggered, we're living with that inner chatter reels going constantly in our brain and in our mind and in our body, we are just molding to more of the same. So again, the idea here is not to beat yourself up for your own stress response, but to use the foundation of understanding how and why it happens, how and why we perceive the way we do, and learn then to be able to authentically create a different experience. So what we're going to do now is we're first going to identify what stress is for us, how it's manifest, what are our triggers, what are our physiological responses, and then we're going to learn a step-by-step approach through this blueprint to be able to authentically create the capacity for a different way of being. So again, all these reflections are made to kind of organically grow one from another. So last week I had you just kind of start really just brainstorming and stream of consciousness writing about what is stress for you. So now with all the information that you've learned about perception and why your perceptions are unique to you, how you get programmed to see the world through your different perceptions, how you see the world through how you feel. So what we're going to do is these two reflections are going to be combined together for your second assignment due this week. And you're going to be writing about your personal triggers. I mean, we all get triggered by different things. And some of us get super triggered by something that isn't necessarily warranted by the circumstance. Sometimes it is, but sometimes we tend to. So the triggers are the things that you might overreact, or things that are tender, or the things we talk about hitting your bruised bones a little bit. So I just want you to reflect a little bit on what are your personal triggers. And again, this isn't about right or wrong. It's not about beating yourself up. It's just about kind of recognizing. And so I want you to look at the exercise and reflection at identifying emotional triggers in your book and read that over, and then also kind of read the way it's leading you to kind of think about questions. Again, you're not answering the questions verbatim, but after watching this video and after reading that, what I want you to do is then just kind of brainstorm, stream of consciousness writing, what are some of your own triggers? If you tend to get triggered over the same thing under all different kinds of experiences in your life and it kind of replays, then it might be something that you're a little bit more triggered by yourself. And then what happens is once we get triggered, our inner chatter just starts going crazy. We all have that, the endless reels. We have somewhere between 50 and 80,000 thoughts a day, and they're 80% or 90% negative, and they're 80 or 90% repetitive. It's like the endless loop, and we all have them. So what does your inner chatter tell you? usually your inner chatter is triggered by your perceptions, or it's, it kind of starts off by what the things that are triggering you. So what does your inner chatter say to you? What does it say? What does it manifest? What does it try to get you to believe? And again, this is also in your book on the exercise and reflection. So I want you to write the exercise and reflection on identifying your emotional triggers, and then also the exercise and reflection on your inner chatter, and then you're going to combine those with each part labeled and submit those as one document together. And then next week what we're going to do is we're going to get way deeper into the breaking down the physiological responses to stress and understanding your heart rate variability and understanding your biochemical processes and understanding your neural responses. And again, I'm just going to walk you through those so we can get a little bit more deeper into your fear response system, so then you can understand then how we begin to take all that knowledge and then have it work for us instead of against us, because this is all about repatterning or reprogramming a different way of being. All right, have a good week and see you next time around.